Ua vinaka, tēnā koutou katoa, and warm Pacific greetings from here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I am. My name is Thalia Kehoe Rowden. I'm the Strategy and Engagement Lead at the Human Rights Measurement Initiative, or HRMI, as we call ourselves for short, and you can too. I wish I were here with you today in Fiji. I would love to be, and I'm very sorry that we can't all be gathered together, but I'm glad to know that you are all gathering together to talk about human rights in Fiji and the wider Pacific. I'm here, I've been asked to speak about the data that we have available for Fiji and the wider Pacific that we're launching today. And so I'm going to give you a little video tour through the Rights Tracker. So that's rightstracker.org, where all of our data are publicly available for you to use in any way that helps you in your work. So I'm going to share my screen and take you on a tour through the data. You can follow along on your own screen if you have one available. And this video, I imagine we'll make available as a recording afterwards as well, so that you can refer back to it if you would like a little refresher or reminder on something. So I'm going to share my screen and show you rightstracker.org. This is where you arrive to see all the data that HRMI produces. We put everything on this website and make it all publicly available for anyone in the world to use under a Creative Commons non-commercial license. You can find out all about us, and you can look at our methodology, and you can even download the entire data set if you want to work with the data in a different way than we're showing it to you. But what most people do is go straight to their country. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go straight to Fiji and look at all of the data that we have produced for Fiji over a number of years and see what the scores are that we're releasing today as well. So every country has its own page. Here's Fiji's page. And on this front page, the At a Glance tab, where you arrive, you get all the core human rights scores. So you get 5 economics and social rights scores. That's the rights to education, food, health, housing, and work, which includes a measure of adequate income. Then you get 2 sets of civil and political rights. So you get these physical integrity rights, the right to freedom from arbitrary arrest and detention, forced disappearance, death penalty, extrajudicial execution, and freedom from torture and ill treatment. And then 3 empowerment rights, the right to assembly and association, opinion and expression, and the right to participate in government. All of these scores on the front page are all you need. If you're writing a report or a press release and you want to discuss some data on the human rights situation in Fiji, you can use these headline scores, and you don't need to go into any more detail unless you want to. But we do have a lot more detail, and so I'm just going to take you on quite a quick overview tour of the data that we have for Fiji and the different ways that you can look at it. So we're going to start with, we have a whole nother set as well, the Pacific region data on this tab, but I'm going to come to that last. So I'm going to start with the quality of life data, and these headlines across the top, these tabs, are where you go to find much more detail on each section. The most important thing to know about the quality of life scores is that we're measuring how well the government is doing at meeting its international obligations. So Fiji, like most countries in the world, has signed up to the United Nations Treaty, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And the obligation that every country has that has signed that agreement is to essentially do the best you can with what you have. It's acknowledged in the treaty that resources will constrain countries from what they're able to achieve in these areas. So the obligation, as I'm sure many of you know, is what's called progressive realization, that every country needs to do the very best it can with the resources it has. And that's what we measure. So when it comes to education, our score doesn't tell you how good the education system is. It tells you how well the government is doing at turning its current resources into good education outcomes for its people. This 100% mark at the end of the graph is what we have calculated ought to be possible right now at Fiji's level of income, because of what we've seen is achievable in other countries at the same level of income. And so you'll see that Fiji's top score for food is 93.3%. And that obviously, if that was a test score, that would be an amazing score. But these are not test scores. These are showing you how close you are to get how close each government is to reaching its obligation. And there is still quite a gap there between the achievement and the obligation. And so you'll see we've got these interpretation lines saying that a score in this band is a good score. A score in this band where the food score is a fair score. It's okay, but there is room for improvement. These scores for health, housing, and work unfortunately fall into the bad range, and the score for education falls into the very bad range. Again, these are not judging the experiences of people on the ground, but judging governments, successive governments over time, on how well they are converting the resources of the country into good human rights outcomes for the people in Fiji. If we go down, we can see a bit more detail about how those scores come about. So when it comes to education, we have these 3 different sub-scores. We've got a score based on primary education rates, and the HRMI score for how well the government is doing falls into the good range. So that's excellent. The score for secondary education, which is based on secondary school enrollment rates, is in the very bad range. It's nearly in the bad range, but it's there's a long way to go. And the score here for quality education is unfortunately very poor. And you can do that for each of these rights. So health, we have a score for child health, adult health, and reproductive health. And we see that the child health score is the best one. The adult health is not great, and reproductive health is looking pretty problematic. If you scroll down, you also see some gender disaggregated scores. And so you can scroll through those. And then you get scores over time. And so if we look at primary education, for instance, I've just clicked on sufficient healthy food. We'll look at that. So if we look at sufficient healthy food, which is our food indicator, we see that the score used to be really excellent. It dipped a bit, and it is starting to slightly recover. There's still a bit of room to go. If we look at primary education, which was a very good score, we can see that 20 years ago, some significant improvements were made. And it was a very good score for a long time through there. There has been a little bit of recent volatility. It's still a good score. And you can look through any of these. So you might want to look through at adult health, which is based on the sort of adult longevity survival rates. And that's been, reasonably steady with some slight improvements, but certainly you'd want to see more improvement. That's a score where you'd want to see, gradual improvements over time more than perhaps there have been. Also on this page, now you'll notice that the most recent score we have is for the year 2020. All of our data for these scores come from international databases like UNESCO, the World Bank, OECD, and they collect data from all countries in the world, or as many as they can, and they publish the data, and it takes 2 or 3 years for that process to happen. So the data comes to us, and then we can apply our methodology to get an income adjusted score. So the most recent data that is available in the world is for the year 2020. So there's a bit of a lag. We're not able to measure more recently than that. But what we can do is that we can provide some extra nuanced information that is much more up to date about which groups of people are particularly not enjoying their rights. And so we collect this data by asking human rights experts on the ground in Fiji, people whose job it is to monitor the human rights situation in the country, and ask them about levels of violations and about which groups of people are particularly at risk of violations or at risk of missing out. And so what people said for the year 2022 about the situation in 2022, we asked them in 2023. So for education, we can see that about 1/3 of the people that we asked identified people with disabilities as being particularly at risk of not enjoying their right to education. And you can scroll through here and see all of the different word clouds. And then also all of the word clouds are being collected in this people at risk tab. So you can go to people at risk, and you can see the first word cloud, followed by the second, followed by the third. And so if you were interested in a particular group of people, so perhaps you work on the rights of disabled people, so you might look here, you click that, and then you can see where that group is showing up as being identified as being at risk of human rights violations, all the way down through the data. And that can be useful for reports that you're writing, or say press releases, or submissions to Parliament, because you can formulate a sentence. This is something like, people with disabilities were identified as being at risk of all 5 economic and social rights that HRMI measures, or something like that, whatever is true as you count it down. Now, if I take us back to the at a glance page and we see the other categories of rights that we were looking at, so we have 2 sets of civil and political rights. One is the physical integrity rights, and one is the empowerment rights. And each of those has its own tab up here. So if we go to empowerment, we can see Fiji's latest data in a bit more context. Here we show the score. The score here is 5.4 for participation in government. We show it within an uncertainty band to show our level of certainty about the score. These are reasonably narrow bands, but the range is somewhere between 4.3 and 6.6 for the score. But if you're citing the score, you're welcome to just say 5.4. You don't need to give all of the extra context, though you're welcome to. We have some automatically generated sentences that interpret the data, and you're welcome to use these in your reports also. And then we have trends over time. We've been running this research in Fiji for 6 years, so we have 6 different data points, and we see that there have been some improvements over time, with some gradual falling off in the last year. But you'll be able to observe trends over time looking at these graphs. And then the people at risk come below again here. Something that you might be interested in is how Fiji is doing compared to the wider Pacific region, or you might be working on the wider Pacific region and you want to see a bit of context, regional context. If you want to compare any countries or get a list of countries and see how they're all doing, you do that using the rights menu. So if we go to, for instance, primary education, where we saw Fiji had a very good score, we can look at primary education all around the world. So we could, for instance, generate a sentence that says out of 181 countries, Fiji comes, whatever number it is, I haven't counted. And that could be good for a headline. If you were working in the press, or if you wanted to make a particular point, depending on where everyone falls. But you might want to filter it down. And so filtering down to just looking at Pacific countries may be useful for you. So use that filter button. And then you get the scores for primary education. These are all income adjusted scores. So this is judging each of these countries based on its own level of income. So it's a level playing field. And so you see, for instance, that, the two of the richer countries, New Zealand has got a very good score, but Australia is right in the middle. So these are income adjusted. And you'll see that Fiji comes 4th out of 14 countries. And that again might be an encouraging headline that you might want to be drawing attention to in terms of the progress that a country's made and what's possible in Fiji. You might also want to use this to say this is what's possible, and then compare it to one of the scores that needs more improvement. And you can do this for all of the rights using this rights menu. So now that I've got a Pacific filter on, if I use the rights menu, then that should stay on with all of the other rights we look at. So we might want to go to the right to freedom from torture and ill treatment, one of the civil and political rights we measure. Now, there are just 6 countries in the Pacific that we measured that for this year. And you see that Samoa has the highest score, but it also has a very wide uncertainty band. We had quite a small sample size. So we're not absolutely sure what the score is for Samoa. Our best guess is 7.5, but there's quite a range. The next best score is Tonga with a very narrow band, so we're quite sure about that. New Zealand comes next. Then Fiji and Australia have exactly the same score and a very similar uncertainty band. And then Papua New Guinea is down a step at the bottom of the table, sadly. You can do that for all of the rights, but let me take you now to a completely different section of the website, and I'll just show you on this tab. the Pacific region data. So this is data that we produce only for countries in the Pacific because it was requested at our Pacific region co-design workshop a few years ago, when we were discussing all the different ways that we measure human rights and what we could do in the Pacific. The human rights experts who were gathered together expressed desire to have a few different things measured that weren't currently in our methodologies. And so we have this pilot project where for the Pacific, we measure these 5 extra things. So we measure the climate crisis and how it impacts human rights. We measure Indigenous sovereignty, Indigenous land rights, cultural rights, and violence in the community. So not just violence by police and military, which comes under our core set of civil and political rights, but also violence in the community. So these things were requested by people from the Pacific, and we've worked with Pacific practitioners to produce this set of research. For the first 4, we give a simple average. So the question is, how much has the climate crisis worsened human rights conditions in Fiji? And the average of all the responses we got is, well, moderately. It has made quite a difference. Possibly more useful than the simple average number is all of this information where people have given quite specific information about how the climate crisis has affected different human rights, from things to destruction of classrooms, to poverty, to the impact on women, all kinds of detail in here. So I encourage you to just have a good read in this Pacific region data tab. As we go down further, we have a score for Indigenous sovereignty, and then again, more qualitative information, Indigenous land rights, cultural rights, and then we get to the violence scores, where it's not just a simple average, it's a statistically composed score that uses the same methodology as our civil and political rights. So these are really robust scores that are comparable across time and between countries. And so we see here these scores. 10 would be these people are very safe from violence. 0 is they're not at all safe from violence. And these are the scores that come somewhere in between for Fiji. And again, there's information all the way down on specific circumstances for violence against those communities. And again, you can see a comparison across the Pacific. If you go right to the bottom here, if we look at violence against children, we can see scores for Fiji, which, the score is not great, but it is the best score in the Pacific. Tonga is next, New Zealand next, Cook Islands, Australia, Papua New Guinea, and Solomon Islands. That was a very quick tour through some of the ways that you can look at the data, and I encourage you to re-watch this video and other videos on our YouTube channel, the Human Rights Measurement Initiative YouTube channel, to refresh your memory or get some ideas on how to use the data. I'm available, as are all of the other people who have been involved today, to answer questions or to discuss further if you have thoughts about the data, or you would like to discuss how you can best use the data in your work. So please do be in touch. Again, I wish I were there today, but I wish you all the best for a fruitful discussion and all the best in all the work that each of you are doing to improve people's lives around the Pacific. Thank you so much.